and I think we are. But uh, anyway, so I show up and John's just sitting there, and
Sorry.
Thank you, Jim.
So, Jim, did you want me to start now?
Please.
Okay. Everyone, welcome to the April 2026 program of the League of Women Voters Lunch and Learn series. I'm Nancy Comer, a member of the Lunch and Learn Committee, with a few logistic details before we get started with today's presentation on suffrage song. Please mute your audio and turn off your video so we can focus on our speaker. We use the chat function for questions, so please type your remarks there. We will monitor the chat and relay questions to our speaker. In case you didn't know, for over 100 years, the League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan political organization, has encouraged, informed, and encouraged, informed, and active participation in government, and work to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influence public policy through education and advocacy. Membership's open to all. For further information, go to our website, which I will have typed in the chat. The League of Women Voters Lincoln-Lancaster is proudly nonpartisan, neither supporting or opposing candidates of political parties at any level of government. Videos of previous Lunch and Learns are available on the League's website, and I'll put that into the chat as well. So now let's go ahead and get into today's program. Judy Kelly will be introducing our speaker.
Thank you, Nancy. Our speaker today is nationally recognized illustrator Caitlin Cass, a native of Oak Park, Illinois, which is where Frank Lloyd Wright Studio is located, just outside of Chicago. We've asked Caitlin to speak at Lunch and Learn today because of her graphic history book, Suffrage Song, The Haunted History of Gender, Race, and Voting Rights in America. Caitlin's appearance here is timed within a month of Suffs, the musical, which is playing at the Lead Center here in Lincoln, May 5th through 10th. It's a Tony Award-winning musical. In fact, some of Caitlin's artwork from Suffrage Song will be on display throughout the Lead Center lobby before and during the run of Suffs, so keep your eye out for it. Caitlin is an interdisciplinary artist and cartoonist. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Lily, and The Nib. Her art has received support from the National Endowment for the Arts, the New York State Council on the Arts, and the Nebraska Arts Council. She is assistant professor of studio art and illustration at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. Our local league president, Jean McGuire, and I had the privilege of seeing Caitlin at the League of Women Voters Greater Omaha annual meeting last September. So we know you will enjoy Caitlin's presentation. Caitlin?
All right. All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm here to talk about my book, Suffrage Song. This is it right here. It covers the history of voting rights in the U.S. from 1848, when women first advocated for the right to vote at the Seneca Falls Convention, all the way until 1965 with the passage of the Voting Rights Act. And of course, we're still fighting to maintain our rights to vote. And so this story's not over, but you got to pick a time period, and this is the one I picked. This is a little timeline that I've created in celebration of the, I think my screen sharing just got paused. Hold on a second. I'm going to stop it and then reshare. Sorry about that, y'all. Okay. So this is a timeline that I created to celebrate the book's release, to give you kind of an overview of what's covered. And on the left, you can see Alice Paul and the National Women's Party putting the suffrage flag, which I've changed the colors of because my book is color coded. The new women of the 1920s, the people who were active around the turn of the century are blue. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, Sojourner Truth and Frances Watkins Harper are yellow. And those women did not ever get to vote in their lifetimes, versus Carrie Chapman Catt and the folks who are green did get to vote before they died. And then the red is the civil rights movement. So that's what the color coding is. And so on the left, you can see Alice Paul putting the flag, the suffrage flag, over the side of her balcony to celebrate at headquarters the passage of the 19th Amendment. And then you can see on the far right is Fannie Lou Hamer testifying that she's not allowed to vote, and the violence she faced for trying. This was installed, this is what at UNO, but also it's been installed in Chicago and in other places as well. And you can see the scale of the final panorama that I created to celebrate that book's release. But I wanted to talk a little bit of why this history is haunted and why I've included ghosts. So I'm going to start with reading this short excerpt. This history was written for ghosts. They embody the anxiety of existing in a broken system. They represent the history that still needs to be reckoned with and the history that remains unwritten. The racism that fueled America's growth continues to impact my everyday life. When I started this project, I was working through dread, winter 2019. I had a deep and growing anxiety about white women in history. I resisted calling these women racist for fear that it would negate all the good they did. I felt shame that my ancestors had voting privilege while many people did not. This made me revert to absolutes, as if a person can't be both good and bad at the same time. I struggled to hold all the good white suffragists did in my head alongside the damage they caused. It was easier to focus on the bad, but that wasn't the whole story. Here's Carrie Chapman Catt, a particularly upsetting offender, and she's saying, "I'll say whatever racist thing it takes to get white women the vote." These women fought for my right to vote, and so I felt linked to them by both gratitude and shame. There I am voting in the 2020 election. These women haunted me. In her book Caste, Isabel Wilkerson talks about how the U.S. never truly dealt with slavery's legacy. Whatever is lurking will fester, whether you choose to look or not. Germany was forced to reckon with the Holocaust. They pay reparations to survivors and incorporated the history into their school curriculums. In the US, teaching the history of racism remains controversial. STEM, not CRT. Stop teaching critical race theory to kids. We, the parents, stand up. The wound has festered and old themes endure. The more research I did for this project, the more I saw how interconnected the struggles of all disenfranchised groups were. Frances Watkins Harper put it best in 1866. We are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on the weakest of its members without receiving a curse in its own soul. So here's a suffrage song. So I've explained the ghosts a little bit, and of course I'm going to talk a bit more about the connection between suffrage and spiritualism as well, because that's where they first emerged kind of organically. And then I realized that the language of haunting is all over this history. It's all over a lot of history of racism and the unfinished business of American history in particular. But the book also is about songs, because the songs kind of unified suffragists across many different time periods. They always sang at these meetings. And then also within the civil rights movement, of course, music was an important part of the civil rights movement. So even the cover is based on suffrage sheet music. So you can see on the right is from 1916, suffrage sheet music was sold to raise money for the cause. And so I've tried to integrate a lot of the look and feel of the ephemera from the time period into the book itself. So I'm going to read a short excerpt that talks more about the songs. All those sentimental songs. Music was part of the fight for women's rights from the beginning. Suffrage sheet music was sold at conventions to raise money. Suffrage songs built communal feeling at meetings and gave attendees a way to be involved. Our country now, from thee claim we our liberty. The songs themselves often suffered from the same platitudes and stereotypes that were found in women's magazines and sentimental literature of the day. Guarding homes, altar fires, daughters of patriot sires, their zeal our own inspires, justice to claim. They reinforce what historian Barbara Welter later dubbed the cult of true womanhood. So there's Barbara Welter talking about this history in 1966. A true woman embodied piety, purity, submissiveness, and domesticity. Of course, the songs occasionally hammered at one of these pillars. I don't, and I can't, and I won't, and I shan't. I will speak my mind if I die for it. So one of the reasons I really identified with this is because I feel like whatever we do, whatever we try to do, there's always a little bit of an inadequacy with fighting these unjust systems. And so I'm a regular old human being trying to untie some knots I felt to see if I can understand them better. That's what the song started to represent for me. Like it's just dealing with the imperfection of your tools that you have available to you, but doing it anyway. And then, of course, as I mentioned, there's also a lot of singing during the civil rights movement. So the book ends with one of the longest sections. It's on Fannie Lou Hamer, and she was always singing to help build communal spirit during the civil rights movement. So here she is as a little girl singing This Little Light of Mine after a particularly upsetting moment in her family's life when the mules on their farm were killed by an angry group of white men. The book, we'll see if this little video works. The book has a lot of foldouts because I wanted it to kind of feel like you're looking through archives. And so it also has etchings. I wanted it to really feel old. And so while like the imagery from this is inspired by Godey's Lady Book, which of course is an old-fashioned magazine that advocated for just didn't want to involve politics at all because it was taboo for women to speak about politics, but also because their readership spanned North and South during the Civil War. But they did actually make a bit of a statement on where they stood on that because they published more anti-abolition books than pro-abolition books, book reviews. That was one place where politics kind of seeped in. So I made this satirical print. 50,000 men died at Gettysburg, and our dresses keep getting more amazing. Maybe we should end slavery. Radicalism is unbecoming of a lady. To critique women, to critique the white women in particular during this time period, even though, it was the norm, the society norm, and it was what was expected of people. But I think looking back through a contemporary lens, especially, it's easy for us to be critical. And of course, we don't know what it was like to be fully enmeshed in that kind of culture. But it's still interesting to kind of think through that and be critical and stay with it. I got interested in doing history, I think, in part because as a little girl, I was involved with the local cemetery walk of the Oak Park River Forest Historical Society. So on the left there, I am playing an Iroquois theater fire victim. I told the story of how in Chicago there was this theater fire that broke out on stage at a holiday production, and everybody rushed to the doors, but the doors opened inward, so they couldn't get out because everybody was like pushing up against the doors and they couldn't open them. And so this is actually why exit doors now always open outwards in theaters. So I told this very dramatic story about how many of my friends died around me, and we died in these giant piles, and I made adults cry, and it was a particularly moving experience for me. And I think that kind of fueled my obsession with disasters in history. On the right there, I'm playing a pioneer girl, which of course at the time didn't seem at all problematic to me, but later I kind of learned about how we were taking land from Native Americans. And so I feel differently about it now, but that monologue was a lot more optimistic, and one of the only ones that wasn't disastrous. I also played smallpox victims and other things like that. One year I was the victim of a serial killer, a woman who killed her stepchildren. Anyway, so, but through this, I actually got my first byline. I published an article with my friend Fiona about our experience doing tales of the tombstones in the cemetery. And so I think that this was really inspiring to me, and I kept doing it. And I recently got to return to the Oak Park River Forest Historical Society and give a talk, which was what felt really special. But I wanted to show a little bit about what my visual research process is. So this is just an example of a bunch of the visuals that I'll pull as I'm working on these comics. So this is a page about Seneca Falls. And you can see on the left, you can see the meeting house, the church where they held the Seneca Falls Convention, and then also this table, which was in the McClintock family parlor and was used as a seance table as well. Which I'm going to talk more about. There were a lot of suffragists who were also spiritualists, because it was a venue where women were allowed to speak in public. The spiritualism kind of swept the nation after the Civil War, because so many people had died, so many family members were gone, and people were trying to communicate with the dead. And of course, also the new technology, telegraphs, people really believed that maybe this technology would help them speak to the dead. And so they would use the planchette, they would channel the dead, they would speak on stage. And as long as they were channeling dead white guys, it was acceptable. But so in this very spiritually charged world, that was the context that Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony were writing the Declaration of Sentiments. And there's letters of Elizabeth Cady Stanton talking about channeling the spirits of the revolution when she was writing that, which I found really fascinating. Of course, later there was all kinds of controversy with Victoria Woodhull, who was a stockbroker and sex worker who really became notorious for she would get her stock information from wealthy men through sex workers. And so she ended up in jail for publishing the Beecher scandal. And so she, of course, became a notorious figure, and they tried to distance themselves from spiritualism as a result of that. But I think that it's really interesting to study this history and the way that the kind of language of ghosts and that sort of radical imagination has kind of come back into the national conversation about the changes that need to happen. And you can actually go see this spiritualist table that the Declaration of Sentiments was written on. It's in the National Museum of American History. I went a year ago, or actually 2 years ago now, and they had my book in the gift shop. So I was really excited about it. But before the book came out, I was working at an all-girls high school in Buffalo, New York, which was kind of moving because I was able to incorporate that history, the history of a few of the women who actually went to Buffalo Seminary where I taught. I was teaching art there. I started making these comics because I had already been doing these comics that I would mail out to people, but a lot of them focused on satirizing the history of the Western canon, the history of the West, making fun and jovially at all of the effort that's gone into and continued failure of Western thought to fix any of the problems that really matter. And a local curator was collecting these comics and reached out to me and noticed a turn in my work because I was working at that all-girls school where I was starting to focus more on told history, and reached out for me to do a project for the Suffrage Centennial. And so I started incorporating that into the comics, and eventually that led to this publication that we put out, and there was a big exhibition. And so this was about the first 80 pages of the book. And then there was this exhibition there at the Birchfield Penny with a timeline and a bunch of the original pages from the comic that also was published online. And in the center, we have Susan B. Anthony confronting the ghosts of suffrage, who are the civil rights activists actually coming back in time to say that nobody's free until everybody's free. Because Susan B. Anthony really was somebody who tarried with racism, and I'll talk a little bit more in a moment about their decision to collaborate with George Francis Train, who was like a known racist after the demise of the American Equal Rights Association. But like she also always was sort of trying to work out her relationship with racism in a way that I don't think Elizabeth Cady Stanton was. And I think that's important to honor, and that's a lot of what the book is about. I also really focused on trying to bring in like very small figures that might have only appeared in newspapers, whose story would get lost if you didn't like really look for it. And so Miss Forthingham was a Buffalo teacher who went to protest at the White House gates with Alice Paul. And these are actual newspaper clippings. They're from the microfiche that I collage and then watercolor the story around. And it's just interesting to see the way that people talked about these women at the time. And then, of course, she after spending some time in jail, she was awarded one of these pins that represented that jail time. It's like the jail doors that the National Women's Party would give to people. I think it's interesting, too, how there was always the National Women's Party, and then there was the NAWSA. So they were the more moderate people that worked with more directly with Woodrow Wilson. And then there was the more radical folks that sort of worked at different levels. I think we see that again in all of these movements. This was the mock-up I then sent to a publisher with the additional content, and this is how I ended up with the final book. So I actually hand-did the cover and made a slipcase and made all the foldouts, and that's how I convinced them to do the foldouts. Here's a couple of examples of how the pages fold out. Again, trying to really get across those beautiful style of the way things were published and looked, the ephemera of the time period, because I do think the different media we use, just like social media and the internet impact the way we think now, I think that it used to impact the way people think as well. These are just like some of my very messy notes and the things that I read for this to get the project done. It took about 5 years to finish. And here's an example too. This is from Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony's The Revolution. And this talks a little bit about they were very upset after the word male was put into the 14th Amendment, because that was going to, permanently disenfranchise women. And so in that moment, Elizabeth Cady Stanton succumbed to racism and sort of talked about the horrors that were going to be committed against white women because Black men were given the right to vote. Which, we know now is extremely problematic. And she also supported a candidate who was especially racist and would also sort of use those ideas of protecting white women to advance his agenda. So this discusses, so after the Civil War, the American Equal Rights association came together, and it was Black men, white women, Black women, everybody coming together to fight for equal rights for everyone. But in the aftermath of, and in this aftermath of that very radical moment, it was decided that they needed to advance the rights of Black men, most importantly. And, you know, that decision was made by a lot of the white men involved, including Henry Blackwell. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony were extremely upset. And this is when they took funding from George Francis Train and started to break off from the AWSA, which was led by Lucy Stone and her husband, Henry Blackwell. And so the book gets into this and kind of tells the story of how that happened, and the loss of that dream of rights for everyone, and so that they could advance the rights of just one. And the way that so often different groups are pitted against each other in order to move forward, and this sort of false feeling of like we couldn't do more than that. But I also the book is very much about how history gets written, and we wouldn't know a lot of this history if Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Matilda Joslyn Gage had not written it themselves. So the history of women's suffrage was 3 volumes, and there were additional volumes added by the next generation later. But Matilda Joslyn Gage often critiqued Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony for making that history mostly about themselves, which it is. It really does. That's the reason we have the Seneca Falls Convention as the starting moment. It's not really the only one. Other people had talked about the vote before that. But it's the one we remember because they really worked hard to get that as the founding moment. And they did survey people from all over the country, and they had them send their stories in. But as the writers, of course, their stories were a main part of it. And one thing they did do too is they republished Sojourner Truth's "Ain't I a Woman" speech in that slave dialect, which is how it was published in the newspapers, even though Sojourner Truth would have most likely spoken in a Dutch accent because she was from New York and she was a native Dutch speaker. So the book also deals, again, like with what it means to be lost to history. So this is Mary Church Terrell, a founding member of the National Association of Colored Women and the daughter of 2 former slaves who risked arrest to picket for suffrage at the White House gates. She brought her daughter along and likely inspired other Black women to picket, but their names are lost to history. Those women's names were not published in the Suffragists of the National Women's Party publication because they had readership that spanned all political affiliations, and some of them were racist, and they wanted to appeal to those people. And so what does it mean to be lost to history? I'm going to do a little reading again. What does it mean to be lost to history? There they are picketing. Loss suggests passivity, but history is active. In 1921, Mary Church Terrell asked the National Women's Party to pressure Congress to investigate the disenfranchisement of Black women across the South. No woman in this country needs the ballot more than the colored women of the South. History is made, written, edited. There is more than one to write. Terrell's words were not recorded in the stenographer's report, and they were left out of the published meeting minutes. They are victims of lynching, the conflict-lease system, the Jim Crow lines. Just as every choice erases possibility, each history written leaves behind casualties. The National Women's Party refused to help. Is it possible to write history that leaves room for their ghosts? Miss Paul did not want to inject the race problem into her suffrage work. And that's NWP member Ellie Murray. Goes to show us what could have been, could be, if our systems made it be. Alice Paul asked me, what do you women want me to do? It's Mary Church Terrell. Goes to suggest new systems, new ways of being. I said, I want you to tell us whether you endorse the enforcement of the 19th Amendment for all women. History that breathes, that lives, that creates possibility. Paul refused to help. She feared losing the ground many women had gained with the 19th Amendment. Universal suffrage didn't work for Aunt Susan. Why would it work for us? History that refuses to accept a broken system as the only system. Alice Paul had a chance to reject racism. What if she had taken it? And of course, that's a difficult question that lingers in the air. We don't really know. I mean, it probably would have taken a lot longer to get the right to vote. But maybe it would have still happened at some point. And so then the book goes into Fannie Lou Hamer's story, who was, of course, a voting rights activist, a community organizer, and civil rights leader. And she co-founded the Freedom Democratic Party. Her story, I found a lot of great materials on the SNCC Digital Gateway, which the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee is what SNCC stands for. And she has written an autobiography, which was an activist publication, and it was an oral history she gave, and then it was transcribed with photos that were taken by a known photographer whose name is slipping my mind. So I used a lot of her speeches given in different places, and to sort of piece together her story. It was really important to me to make sure it was her words, and that I wasn't putting words in her mouth, especially when there was like a dialect involved, because I know what happened with Sojourner Truth, or I learned about that through working on this project. And amazingly, as I was working on this project, I started in 2019. Two amazing biographies were written about Fannie Lou Hamer. There had been books written, but they were short and often for like a younger audience. And so like there hadn't been any rigorous biographies written about her that were considered like credible sources other than like short journal articles. And so this was such a big deal that these came out as I was working on it, and actually changed what I was able to write. So I think it's so interesting and moving that this history is being actively written, and that's why there's a pushback now. People are getting kind of freaked out by it. But so I want to end with Hamer's story. So I'll read an excerpt from her story. Hamer often referred to this time at her niece's house in rural Tallahatchie County as her exile. There she is. After God helped her escape 16 bullets, her life began to take on biblical proportions. So she wasn't particularly surprised when a man showed up to shepherd her into a new life of activism. His name was Charles McLaurin. Mrs. Hamer, I'm here to bring you to a civil rights meeting in Nashville. Hamer knew it was a sign. She made plans for her daughters to go home and left with McLaurin right away. Did you know I was coming, Mrs. Hamer? Yes, God sent you. No, Bob Moses sent me. Well, God told Bob to tell you to come. McLaurin drove Mrs. Hamer to Jackson, Mississippi. I was a 20th child in a sharecropping family. We'd make 60 bales of cotton and still wouldn't have enough money to live on in winter months. Along the way, she told him her life story. Then one night, this white man went to our lot and went to the trough where the mules had to eat and stirred up a gallon of Paris green into the mules' food and killed everything we had. When we got there, one mule was already dead. The other two mules and the cow had their stomachs all swelled up. It was too late to save them. The poisoning knocked us back down flat. We never did get up again. That white man did it just because we were getting somewhere. White people never like to see Negroes get a little success. All of this stuff is no secret in the state of Mississippi. McLaurin was only in his early 20s. He'd been stationed in Ruleville to register voters. He'd taken Mrs. Hamer on her first registration attempt. As they were riding back from the courthouse that day, cars of angry white men followed them, and McLaurin feared they'd be run off the road. Then he heard Mrs. Hamer singing. Paul and Silas, bound in jail, had no money to get their bail. It broke the tension and cut his fear. They got home safely. Later that day, Mrs. Hamer stood up to her boss, plantation owner D. Marlowe. You'll have to go down there and withdraw your registration. We're not ready for that in the state of Mississippi. I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself. McLaurin was deeply moved by her bravery. This is in a 2015 interview. You can see it on YouTube, actually. And damn, you think about that, here's this woman, Black, challenging this man. Damn. Even early on, it was clear that Hamer was the type of leader that the movement needed. She was the type of person civil rights leader Andrew Young had looked for to help build the movement. I was looking for people who had PhD minds, but who never had an opportunity to get an education. Mrs. Hamer was that way. She was actually her window was shot at 16 times after she escaped to rural Tallahatchie County. And so she does eventually go to testify. This is at the Democratic National Convention, and she's talking about how they have to sleep with their telephones off the hook because their lives are threatened daily because we want to live like decent human beings in America. So she's testifying, and then Lyndon B. Johnson moved quickly because he was worried that this might sway the election, and so he had them switch what was televised that night to a 9-month anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, and but it backfired because Fannie Lou Hamer's story was still screened that evening. And people saw it, and it was moving, and I think it really did help push forward voting rights in the country. So it ends with Fannie Lou Hamer's words, echoing back through the history of suffrage, from Anthony speaking to an audience to the actual passage of the 19th Amendment. And it also ends, and there's a repeated refrain in the book, she put in her work, but there's so much left to do. And it really still remains the case, I think, that there's so much left to do. So I always like to end with a call to action. Here we can stop the Save America Act, which I know the League of Women's Voters is on board with. It would disenfranchise many voters, especially women and trans folks, would require passports to register to vote, effectively creating a poll tax, would keep many eligible voters from voting, and it would also help an authoritarian president stay in power. So email, call, or write Deb Fisher and Pete Ricketts, our senators. And then also I saw in an email, because I'm a member of the league, that there's an event next week to learn about the SAVE Act. So Common Cause's executive director, Gavin Geese, is speaking. I might be mispronouncing his last name, but I just registered for this. You can as well. I know I'm speaking to the choir. Y'all probably know about this already, but it still seems important to say. We got to continue this legacy. So let's do the work. Happy to take questions. I'll say my book is currently sold out. You can still get used copies, and occasionally a new one comes up on the regular outlets, but it is being reprinted. We'll have a paperback version coming out next spring, and I'm going to make some new content that just sort of updates the global attack on, quote, gender ideology and the global rise of fascism and anti-women sentiments. So that's coming up. I'm happy to take questions now if anybody has them. Stop my screen share. Oh, I can't hear you, Judy.
Katie Bradshaw said Francie and Finch in Lincoln had a couple of copies of your book 2 weeks ago.
Yes. Oh, that's great. Good to hear. Thank you.
I also was able to get a copy on barnesandnoble.com, but that was at Christmas. I gave it to a good friend of mine.
Oh, lovely.
Kathleen Rutledge said, I am so grateful for Caitlin Cass's focus on racism in some suffragists, and after the 19th Amendment passed, their abandonment of Black women and men whose voting rights were curtailed under Jim Crow. Suffrage song is a wonderful way to tell the story. Thank you, Caitlin Cass.
Oh, thank you so much.
And let's see. Claudia Stevenson, the president of the League of Women Voters of Nebraska, said this was fantastic and thank you for being a member.
Of course. I need to get more involved, though. I've barely done anything, but happy to be.
I'm sure you will get involved.
Yeah.
Kathleen Rutledge asked the question, Is the reprint not out until spring 2027?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not coming out until March 2027. But that's just the cycle of when their books come out. It's an independent press and they only do it every so often with the bigger books. But again, it is available used still. I see it on a lot of independent bookstores and main website and like Amazon. So it's still available.
Caitlin, will the paperback edition have the foldouts?
It will not have the foldouts. Nope.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah. You know what? Libraries don't like them because they get ripped. So that was a big message. And so they decided not to do them.
It was so impressive to see them though. The book is from a production standpoint, it's just terrific, I think. Glenda Moore asks, Caitlin, what is your current or next project?
Sure. So I'm working on a history and memoir. It's going to be kind of hybrid, and it talks about it's going to be about ecofeminism, but also about some medical sexism that I experienced as a young person. And it'll kind of move between history and memoir. And so it again deals with women's rights and sexism, but in a different way.
Cynthia Didion asks, will there be another printing in the hard copy?
There will not be another hardcover that I'm aware of. So yeah, not right now. So get it while you can.
Are there other questions? So, as I mentioned earlier, Caitlin's artwork, some of her artwork from the Suffrage song, will be displayed at the Lead Center during the run of Suffs the musical. And the League of Women Voters of Lincoln-Lancaster County is in partnership with the Lead Center, and we can actually offer you a discount on your tickets, and there will be a donation to the League of Women Voters of Lincoln-Lancaster County of $5 when you buy that. So please look at our website, lincolnleague.org. On the homepage, if you scroll down, there's a flyer and there's a QR code where you can go right on and do that. It's only for evening performances and for the top 2 tiers of tickets. So please join us. Christy says, thank you for telling this story. Caitlin, your research is very enlightening. Katie Bradshaw said, was there anything you really wanted to include in the book that you just weren't able to fit in?
You know, I feel like I kind of skated over the immigrant story a little bit, because of course a lot of immigrants didn't have the right to vote because of Chinese exclusion, and that's mentioned in the book, but it's something that I would have liked to spend more time on. So I'm actually working on a master's in history now at the University of Nebraska-Kearney, and I just was in an immigration history class, and I started a Substack. Just trying to get myself like more politically engaged. It's called Every Day, Let's Do One Thing to Fight Fascism. And I have been doing a lot of research into immigration history now and doing illustrations. It's like an illustrated podcast and Substack that deals with that history, and also just the struggle against nationalism, which I think is a global problem that is sort of fueling these fascist ideas. So it is something I'm addressing retroactively.
And let's see, Claudia, you're going to be there. Are you coming on Tuesday night? Because Caitlin will be at the Lead Center on Tuesday night to see some.
Oh, I'm going to be there on Thursday.
Oh, Thursday.
Yeah.
Well, the League of Women Voters of Lincoln-Lancaster County has a booth, so we will have folks there every performance. So we'll look for you. Lana Novak said written for young adults. I don't know if that's a question or
I think it's definitely not specifically written for young adults, but definitely very accessible. My friend had her 10-year-old reading it and she's like completely engaged. It does mention rape, which I think makes it fall into that young adult category rather than middle grade. But certainly I think I was writing it for a general audience. So yeah.
Judy Moose asked, how do young people respond to your message and book? Do you find you're able to connect with young people in a unique way by virtue of the interesting flavor of your book? This was amazing. You are awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. I do feel like people really respond to it well. I haven't gotten to speak that much to young people separately. Like I feel like mostly I've been speaking to adults about the book and they buy it for their young people, and then I kind of hear secondhand that they really enjoyed it. But it seems I know that a lot of high school and college professors have used it in their classrooms, and it's because I meticulously cite a lot of different sources. It's like a great entryway into reading the academic articles as well on the topic. And people have responded that they really like how it rethinks the periodization of the history and putting the civil rights movement with the women's suffrage movement, instead of having them be separate. You think differently about those topics. I'm also going to drop that Substack link in my website.
What do your students think about the book?
I think they like it. I think they're inspired by it, but I haven't really, I've given some talks and they seem to like it, but I don't know. I haven't engaged in a lot of conversations with them about it. There's just like a weirdness there, when it's your work.
Katie asks, was it a struggle to come up with the color coding you used to illustrate the time periods?
Okay, so one of the things that was just difficult is going against the color coding of the purple and gold flag, which would have been an obvious choice, but only represented some of the movement and time periods. So I just looked at like the ephemera from those time periods and kind of picked, like, the civil rights movement was obviously red. There was red all over their materials, and the yellow made sense because that's an early suffrage color. I feel like the blue of the New Women was like the most arbitrary, but I did see a lot of illustrations that were in that color space. Yeah, so part of it was a little creative license as well.
One thing I want to mention is that the League of Women Voters of Lincoln-Lancaster County annual meeting is coming up on April 18th, and it is open to all. And at that event, we will be raffling off a copy of Suffrage Song.
Oh, cool.
Hardcover version. So.
Hey.
Any other questions? Did you have any alternate titles?
Oh yeah, at first it was called Suffrage Ghosts, but there were too many books with ghosts in the title, which I appreciated because it forced me to return to really think about the title. And then I feel like I wrote a whole section about the phantasm of the unity of the movement, and it inspired me to go do additional research. So in the end, it felt meant to be Suffrage Song. Oh, that's funny. You got it from the Halloween display.
I like when Katie says she picked up her first copy of your book.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Thanks, Katie.
You have been absolutely delightful, Caitlin. Does anybody else have a question?
Oh, thanks, Katie.
Well, Caitlin, thank you very much. And we look forward to you being involved in more League of Women Voters events, and you coming to Lincoln. Oh, Katie's going to be at the Suffs booth on Thursday.
Okay, I will stop by.
Please. Great. Oh, and we've got other folks, Judy Emu and Donna Thompson. I was one of the recipients, so grateful. Loved the book. Katie gave the book as gifts. So that's lovely.
Yes, thank you so much.
Nancy Comer, do you have
Yes.
more information?
Oh, I was just going to mention, yes, I do. But you talked about working with Common Cause on this too. And that's Gavin Geis is his last name. So that's a pronunciation. Anyway, for the rest of you, if you are inspired to make a difference in our democracy, consider joining the league, the Lincoln and Lancaster League, County League. And if you are not already a member, you can visit the website. That's all in the chat now. Upcoming, our next Lunch and Learn will be May 7th. And Rachel Gibson will provide a recap of the 2026 legislative session, so you don't want to miss that. And everyone, thank you for joining us today. And thanks again, Caitlin. We are now adjourned.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.